keep me warm in the cold of the night.
My name is TessaLuna Lluvia, and I am a former family law attorney, and Amber is a criminal psychologist. And together we are taking on these Innocence Project cases. Now, that does not mean that every case we do, we think that person is in fact innocent, because sometimes, in our opinion, we feel they are guilty. Now, I want to put a disclaimer in this video before we even get started that these are our opinions and that we are not stating our opinions as fact. You yourself can go online and research for yourself and draw your own conclusion. On November 12, 2004, Scott Peterson was convicted of murdering his wife Laci and unborn child Connor. He was sentenced to death and is currently on death row at San Quentin Prison. In part 1 and 2, we talked about when Laci goes missing and we discussed Scott's relationship with Amber Frey. So if you missed it, make sure you go listen to those two before you listen to this one. I will put the link in the description below. Today we will be talking about the witnesses, the verdict, and our conclusion. Let's first discuss the witnesses that claim to have seen Laci the day she disappeared walking their dog Mackenzie. Gary Ermonian was a private investigator hired by Kirk McAllister, which at the time was Scott's pre-arrest attorney, hired 3 days after Laci went missing by Lee Peterson, Scott's father. The reason for this is that the police were already looking at Scott as the main suspect for Laci's disappearance. Gary was hired for the purpose of finding out what really happened to Laci. Gary talks to Scott and finds out that on December 24th at 9:48 a.m. he heads to the warehouse and he believes that Laci left the house with the dog shortly after that. He soon learns that there are more than a few witnesses coming forward with statements that they in fact saw Laci walking the dog at the time that Scott had already left for the warehouse. First witnesses are Homer and Sue Maldonado, who state that between 9:50 and 10 a.m. they are out delivering Christmas presents and notice Laci struggling with the dog. The next witness shortly after the first sighting is Tony Freitas, a bread delivery driver, and he states that he sees a pregnant woman walking a dog on Loloma Avenue at 10:08 a.m. Scott makes a phone call that verifies he has already left for the warehouse. Shortly afterward, Frank and Martha Aguilar spot a pregnant lady on Loloma Avenue walking her dog before 10:30 a.m. There are two more sightings by Vivian Mitchell and Jean Pedrioli in the same area. Diana Campos, who was sitting behind the hospital that was located behind the park waiting on her shift to start, states she sees Laci in the park walking the dog, and behind her 2 men seem to be following her. The dog begins to bark at the men, and the men tell Laci to shut the dog up. Another witness, Mike Chiavetta, also claims to have seen Laci in the same park with the dog, and he also states he did report that to police. So in about a 30-minute time frame, 7 witnesses come forward to state they saw her walking the dog, and all the time frames coincide with each other. Is that a coincidence? According to police, especially John Bueller, who claims there were never any witnesses at all that saw her, say they investigated all sightings and reports, and according to the witnesses, the police never came to talk to them about it at all. And during all of this, Scott was at his warehouse and can prove it. During the trial, the prosecution explains why they were dismissed. They claimed that the neighbor that found Mackenzie walking with its leash on and had put the dog back into Scott and Laci's backyard claims the time frame was 10:18. So any witness that came forward after 10:18 a.m. on Christmas Eve were dismissed. So at this time, it is more than clear that the police are only focused on Scott and are not even trying to investigate anything else that comes in. Now let's fast forward to Sunday, April 13, 2003. At 4 p.m., an infant's body was found by a dog walker on the Richmond shoreline. The next day, Monday, April 14th at 11:43 a.m., a torso of a woman is found by another dog walker on the rocky shore of the Point Isabella regional shoreline. The bodies were discovered about a mile apart at opposite ends of an inlet along the Richmond shoreline on the San Francisco Bay. The bodies would later be confirmed to be that of Laci and her unborn son Connor. On April 18th, 4 days after Laci's body was found, Scott was arrested at the Torrey Pines Golf Course in San Diego, California. At the time of his arrest, he had bleached his hair blonde and had camping gear in his car along with $15,000 in cash, 4 cell phones, and his brother's ID. A dog handler was then brought in to track Laci's scent and claims the dog tracked her to the bay and down a boat ramp. And come to find out, the item used to track Laci's scent, Scott had handled as well. The dog that was used was found to have failed 2 previous certifications, and this evidence and testimony should have been thrown out. Also, Mark Garagos, Scott's lawyer, had purchased a similar boat, put it in the bay with a 100-pound weight, and every time the guy tried to throw the weight over the side of the boat tipped over, and they did that 4 times. During the trial, several jurors were dismissed, including the foreman. He was insistent that they needed to go over all the evidence again. Had he stayed there, there may have been a hung jury. But he claims that he was being threatened by another juror who then stayed on the jury after the foreman's dismissal. A new juror came in, and within 24 hours they were ready with the verdict. Scott's attorney was not present. He had went back to LA thinking he had more time before the verdict would be in. Scott was charged with the murders of Laci and their unborn son Connor and brought before the judge, where he pleaded not guilty. If you listen to part 1 and 2 of this case that I covered, you will know that at this point the police and the media have already convinced most everyone of Scott's guilt. With the bodies being found, Scott's strange behavior, and all the recorded phone calls between Scott and Amber, a jury did find him guilty. He was then sentenced to death on December 13, 2004. So let's get into the final discussion and our conclusion or opinion of Scott Peterson's guilt or innocence. Okay, the first thing I want to discuss starting this one is the witnesses that claim to have seen Laci the day that she went missing. Now, I do want to say this before we even get started talking about it, is that there's a lot of people that are on either ends of this whole thing, and half of them say the witnesses are lying or mistaken the girl that was walking the dog for somebody else that lived in the neighborhood. And I just want to clarify that the police and the media have already talked to this woman, and she said she was not walking her dog on December 24th, but a lot of people still say that Laci was being mistaken, or this lady was being mistaken for Laci. Okay, and then there's a lot of people that say that they saw her, and a lot of people believe that she was seen and that the police aren't doing anything about it. As I talked about in the beginning of this video, we talked about all the witnesses and the timeline that everyone claimed to have seen Laci. And I think the last time she was supposedly seen was after 10:30. Well, everybody is upset that the police are not taking these witnesses seriously. But what I have found out recently is that the police are claiming now, after so many documentaries have been made, after so many people are making a big fuss about it, that the police are saying now that the reason that they are dismissing any witnesses that are coming forward saying that they saw Laci that morning is because the woman that found Mackenzie, which is Scott and Laci's dog, the woman that found the dog and put the dog in the backyard, claims that it was at 10:18 a.m. So any witness that came forward to say they saw Laci after 10:18 was automatically dismissed. Now, my thing is, Amber, is how does she know that it was exactly 10:18? Because she's never really said. She claimed that she left her house, she went here, she came back, she wasn't really sure at the time, but that she would put it around 10:18. Couldn't she have been off a little bit and it was really like 10:38 instead of 10:18?
10:18. My question is why would the police dismiss all these witnesses who don't really know each other, don't ever talk to each other, but gave a perfect timeline back to back of when they've claimed to seen Laci and exactly what she was wearing and what the dog looked like? Why would the police just not say maybe the woman was mistaken and it was really 10:28 or 10:38, and let's listen to these witnesses and let's let them come into court and let's let a jury decide? But they didn't do any of that, and the prosecution wouldn't have any of it. Now, why do you think that is?
That is very interesting, because here is only one woman who said, yes, I brought the dog back to their yard. It was 10:18. And yet more than one witness says they claim to see Laci after this time. I am unsure why they took this woman so seriously. She could have gotten the time wrong. Even 10 minutes more could played out this whole scenario a little bit differently. I don't know why they believed her so strongly about this time, because I don't know about you, but if I saw my neighbor's dog running around and I brought them back to the yard and locked them in the yard so the dog would be safe, I wouldn't be looking at my watch, taking the time, saying, oh, okay, I did this at 10:30. I wouldn't be checking my watch. I would just be like, okay, it's around this time. I would give like a scenario or an estimate. But exactly 10:18? Is she really so sure? It seems very interesting and suspicious.
It does. And I'm just wondering if the police made her feel like she had to give an exact time. And that's why she narrowed it down as close as she could. If they were putting pressure on her, like, look, we really need a time. Was it closer to this? Was it closer to this? Would you say it was this? Would you say it was that? And I'm wondering if she felt pressure to have to give an exact time. And I wonder if she was interviewed today, would she still state that? Would she still be so sure of it, knowing everything that's happened because of it? I'm curious about that, because I've never really seen anybody, and I could be wrong because there's so many documentaries out there. There's no way I could have watched them all. So I'm just wondering if there was someone who came forward and said, you know what, let me go ask her. and a reporter went over there and she said the same thing or something completely different. I'm curious about that, because that is weird. Now, here's something else to think of, too. Let's say all the witnesses saw Laci. Let's say that all the witnesses were correct, okay? Now, the prosecution is also saying that another reason that they're not listening to the witnesses and they're not giving the witnesses any credit of what they're saying is because they actually brought a dog handler in. And the dog handler itself had tracked Laci's scent down the boat ramp and to the bay. And they're saying that because this dog did this, that Laci was 100% on that boat ramp and 100% in that bay because that dog tracked it. But they found out. Now, this is crazy. The defense found out that this dog had failed its 2 previous certifications. And they found out that what they used to track Laci's scent had also been owned and touched by Scott. So could the dog been tracking Scott's scent? And when the defense wanted to bring this up, the prosecution shot it down. So what do you think about the dog handler? I mean, there's so much crazy in this case that I think if a lot of people knew that there were all these contradictions and all this weirdness going on, that they'd almost demand another trial. What do you think about the dog handler?
Working with the police before, T, as well as I know, that scent dogs can be easily mistaken. I grew up in a mountainous state where scent dogs were easily led off the trail because they were more interested in the scent of a rabbit than finding the scent of a person. On top of this, we have a dog who failed certification. So they give him the scent of Laci, they give the dog the scent of Laci. And who knows? They could be tracking, you're right, Scott's scent, because Scott and Laci live together. Scents can contaminate clothes, contaminate shoes. It could be easily distracted by Scott's scent. Absolutely, I agree with that.
And another thing is, a big thing is that the prosecution made such a big hoo-ha over is that Scott had Laci, who at the time was 150 pounds, in the boat with 5 weights attached to her, and he was able to get that body over the boat and into the water with no problem. They even had people come in to say that this was absolutely possible. They had fishermen come in and say that they've had 100-pound sturgeons that they threw over the boat and that it would not have tipped the boat. It would have not been a problem. But Mark Garagos, who is Scott's lawyer, had purchased a similar boat, put it in the bay with just a 100-pound weight. And every time the guy tried to throw the weight over the side of the boat tipped over. And it did that 4 times. 3 of those times he almost drowned. I don't know. Here's another contradiction that I'm talking about, where the prosecution is saying that it's absolutely impossible and the defense is saying that it's completely possible. I mean, it tipped over 4 times. I mean, they did it every single time. So what do you think about the whole boat thing?
I have also seen videos talking about this controversy. I have a few questions about this. So if Scott did it, not only am I curious to know how he got Laci into the water, but how he even got her into the boat in the first place. A pregnant woman is very heavy. So let's just say he had at least one other person helping him, putting her in the boat. Because if he was dragging this pregnant woman into the boat with all these weights, how can he carry her by himself? With the weights added onto her pregnant weight, it's unbelievable how heavy she probably was. I don't believe she could have done this. He could have done this on his own. So he gets her and this other helper in the boat, and they set off in the water. Maybe this extra weight of an extra person would have leveled the boat enough, and they could have put her in the water together without tipping over the boat.
See, now that to me would make sense of how that's the only way they could do it. But we happen to know that Scott's neighbor saw him right before he left that morning putting umbrellas in the back of his truck, and he was by himself. We also happen to know that he was seen at Berkeley Marina launching his boat, and he was by himself. So that's how we know there wasn't another person. But you're right. To me, that would be the only way that I see that he could have done it, like throwing her in the water. And I'm not saying that it's impossible for one person to do this. I'm sure there's fishermen that can get in their little fishing boat smaller than Scott's boat that probably doesn't even have a motor, and they put gators and everything else in them boats and that doesn't tip over. I get what you're saying, but Mark's lawyer had did it exactly like the prosecution is saying it was done, and the boat tipped over 4 times. So you're right. I believe it would have took another person. And since we know that Scott was by himself, it just doesn't seem possible. It just doesn't, that he did that by himself, a pregnant woman with 5 weights attached to her. I just don't see how it was done. I do not see how that's possible. We all know from the evidence photos, if you've been following this case, that the prosecution and the detectives claimed that there were 6 anchors made at Scott's warehouse and that there was only 1 of them left and that 5 were gone. And they say this because they found 1 anchor and then they found round impressions on the concrete and concrete dust of what they believe to have been 5 more anchors. Now, I've seen the photo and it doesn't look like there was 5 more anchors sitting there. It just looked like dust, but that's me. You know, that's my opinion. But they're saying that the anchors, the 5 anchors, were attached, 1 each to the leg, 1 each to the hands, and 1 to the head. And that would exclaim only the torso being found. I don't know, because they brought in experts that say it doesn't work like that. Fish don't attack like that. That body doesn't do that. They've had bodies that have been found underwater that have been anchored down for years, and they don't detach like that. And then the prosecutor is saying it's absolutely possible, and they bring on their own witnesses, and it's just a big contradiction in court. He say, she say, this witness says this witness says that, this expert says this expert says that. So I mean, even that should have just been, you know what, we can't come up with anything that's viable, so we'll just get rid of this part of the testimony because nobody can figure out what's going on. But what do you think about the anchors on the body and where they say they were placed and that only the torso came out? What do you think about that?
Well, here's the thing. Why didn't he use the 6 anchor? I'm curious to know that, was the body too heavy for him and so he only used 5? You would think he would have attached one around her waist or around the torso, maybe under the breast to tie it down, because she's pregnant. They could easily identify her torso this way. It's a missing pregnant woman. It's an interesting why he didn't even out her body a little bit more. But then again, maybe her body was much too heavy for him with all 6 anchors. Also, about all of this contradiction evidence, it really depends, in my opinion, and, working with the police. And I know you worked with police, missing persons. You've dealt with bodies being found in marshes and water before. You know how any little change in the water could affect the body differently. Also, the marine life in the water can affect the body differently. How long the body was in the water affects it differently. The body starts to bloat and decompose almost right away in the water. So all this contradiction evidence, there's probably truth somewhere in between what both of the witnesses are saying and experts are saying.
All right, so while we're talking about the torso, let's talk about how the bodies were found. Now, the very first body that was found was Connor's body, which was Laci's unborn child, and it was found by a dog walker on Richmond shoreline, which of course is part of the San Francisco Bay where Scott said he went fishing. Now, the next day, the torso of Laci was found by another dog walker about a mile apart, still San Francisco Bay. And, of course, both bodies were confirmed to be Laci and Connor. So a dog walker found both of them, different dog walkers. That, to me, was like, what? There must be a lot of people walking their dogs, That right there got me, because I was like, I don't know anything about this place, but there's apparently a lot of dog walkers. But so after the bodies were found, they were hot to get an arrest warrant for Scott. Okay, now, this is, again, just what makes me crazy and cringe, because where I live, in most places, it doesn't work like this. You don't just go arrest a husband because the bodies of Laci and Connor were found, because you still don't know if he did it or, if he's responsible. But they were already ready to arrest him, and the prosecutor said, hey, wait. We're going to wait until they're confirmed to be that, and then you can arrest him. So we talked about before where the media already had him as a bad guy. The police were already ready to convict him the very first time that they heard about this case and went to interview him and said that he was acting weird. In everybody's opinion, in everybody's mind, he was already guilty, and they just wanted his head. Now, this is what pisses me off. Not because at this point he's guilty or innocent, but because he's being tried without a trial, and they're ready for him. So 4 days after they confirmed the bodies, the prosecutor's like, okay, they're confirmed, go get him. And so, well, you know what? Let me rephrase that, because the prosecutor said they couldn't arrest him until the bodies were confirmed. So they were telling him around San Diego, watching his every move, keeping an eye on him. So when the prosecutor said, yes, it's go time, they could go ahead and stop him and arrest him. He was trying to go to the golf course to go golfing with his dad and his brother. I know what you're thinking, golfing, your wife's missing, but in his mind, he's saying that it was an escape from the madness, and he just wanted some time with his family before stuff got crazy. So he calls his brother, and he's like, I can't make it. There's the media following me. They're acting crazy. So the police are actually following Scott, but he thinks it's the media. So he's driving crazy, trying to lose him, circling around, and he finally decides, you know what, I'm just going to go golfing. I'm just going to go to the golf course, and they're just going to have to harass me. Well, at this time, the police are saying he's driving recklessly, he's acting like a maniac, and we're just going to go ahead and stop him and arrest him, even though the results aren't back. So Torrey Pines Golf Club, at April 18th, 2003, 4 days after Laci's found, they arrest Scott. Now, at the time of his arrest, he has blonde hair, okay? He has a beard and a mustache, both blonde, dyed blonde. He has camping gear, $15,000, 4 cell phones, and his brother's ID. And he claims to have had his brother's ID because he gets a discount at the golf club. So let's talk about this. I, think that they never should have been telling Scott. They shouldn't have been worried about what he's doing until they had conclusive evidence that he was a main suspect. It was time to go get him because they had some type of evidence that he was involved in the murder of Laci, which at this point they still don't have anything but suspicion. Now, you can arrest somebody on suspicion and hold them for 72 hours. I get that. I know that. I went through that. But what really did it for the media is when they got him, Amber, he had bleached his hair blonde, and he said it was because he was trying to escape the media and become less looking like Scott Peterson and more looking like somebody else so the media wouldn't recognize him. What do you think about all this craziness going on with the bodies being found and him being arrested and he has all this stuff on him and his hair is blonde? I mean, what's going on?
I go back and forth on this. Do I believe him when he says, well, I want the media to leave me alone, so I dyed my hair blonde? Do I believe him? Because you don't have to dye your hair blonde to have the media not recognize you. You could do other things to have the media leave you alone. You could go somewhere to a friend's house that the media doesn't know about to chill. Why do you have 4 cell phones on you? Is it because did he think the police, bugged his phone and that he wanted to make calls, with untraceable numbers, his brother's ID on him? Okay, he wanted a discount. So obviously he thought this over. He has answers to everything, why he has all of this stuff. Why does he carry such a large amount of money? Now, some people might think he's going to run, that he was preparing to leave. However, he was playing golf. This behavior is a little eccentric, in my opinion, because if he really was going to run, he would have left already and not been playing golf. But he has all these things on him.
Yeah, and the $15,000, a lot of people wanted to know what that was for. And his mother actually came forward after the time of the arrest and told the police that they have a joint bank account. And she accidentally, now Amber, I'm going to say this with a straight face, she accidentally withdrew $15,000 from their account and wanted to give it back to him in cash because the banks were closed. Now, Amber, let me tell you something, girl. You are my sister. If we had a joint bank account together, I'm not going to accidentally withdraw $15,000. I may accidentally withdraw 5 over the amount, which now I'm going into your money, or I may accidentally pay a bill and it came out of you just deposit your check and mine hadn't hit yet. That's understandable. But, Amber, how in the world do you accidentally withdraw $15,000?
People do not accidentally withdraw 15 grand. Let me ask you this. So just say, yeah, I accidentally drew 15 grand and I give it back to you, what would be the first thing you would do with such a large sum of cash? Would you be carrying it around in your purse?
No, I would put it in a deposit envelope and I would take it right back to the bank. And I would make sure that, them little deposit things you can get, you could do that. Now, say you don't want to do that because you don't know if the bank's going to get it. I'm going to go home and put it in a safe. I'm going to put it in my parents' safe. I'm not going to have it on me. But she claims that she had seen him that day and that the banks were closed for the weekend and that she had no way to put it back in the bank. So she gave it to him and told him, look, I'm sorry, I withdrew all this money. I think his family or he was going to run. And you're right. Why would he be playing golf? Exactly. He would not be playing golf if he was trying to run. But let's think about this. Maybe, like he said, he was going to spend time with his family. What if this was for all of them to get together and discuss what he was going to do and for him to say goodbye? See, we don't know. We don't know what this last golf meeting was really about. Are you really going to go play golf? Or are we all going to sit down and talk and act like we're playing golf innocently when we're really having this conversation about what we're going to do because our houses might be bugged or our phones might be bugged? So we have to meet somewhere where we know we can have this conversation out on the golf course where there's no cameras and there's no microphones. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, absolutely, because the only way I believe he wasn't running yet is that he had unfinished business. Maybe he was going to plan to have a conversation to tell them where he was going to go, maybe setting up times that he was going to call with one of his cell phones.
Right. I completely agree. So let's talk about the arrest. Okay, so they arrest Scott. He's charged with the murder of Laci and her unborn son. He's brought before the judge where he pleads not guilty. And, of course, we've talked about the whole Amber thing and the witnesses that the police didn't pay attention to and how the media is already convinced that Scott's guilty and Scott's weird behavior and the phone calls between him and Amber, which were weird. But you know what? I want to say this. When all the phone calls were played in the court between Amber and Scott, not once did he say anything bad about Laci. Not once did he talk about their relationship in a weird way. He always said, I'm still trying to find her. I know I shouldn't have cheated on her. I was weak. I love Laci. I would never hurt her. He never swayed away from that. No matter how much Amber persisted that he answer these questions, he never said anything bad about Laci. Now, could this be because he's cautious of what he's saying? Or is he really just got his guards down and doesn't have anything bad to say because he didn't do anything and this is just one huge-ass coincidence? I mean, if you really put all the evidence together, it's really not much that the prosecution had to say he was guilty, except that he cheated on his wife and that he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina. Other than that, there was nothing else. There's nothing. There's nothing in the house that they found. There was one black hair around a pair of pliers, but that could be transfer. That could just be an explanation. Maybe the pliers were once at the house. Maybe Laci used them to get a nail out of the wall, or maybe she used them on something, or maybe the hair was on Scott, and maybe they got on the I mean, who knows? I mean, there's no explanation for that. You can't prove there was 6 anchors. There's never any photo of there ever being 6 anchors, except they're saying that there might have been some dust on the ground. You have all these witnesses saying that they saw Laci. You have the police discrediting these witnesses when they're adamant that it was Laci and Mackenzie. She walks a lot. They know who she is. They're not stupid. They know who they saw. You've got this one witness coming forward saying she put the dog in the yard at 10:18. Who in the world knows what they did at 10:18? Maybe around 10:15, maybe around 10:30, maybe around closer to 10. But who says 10:18? Honestly, come on now. It's weird because having no evidence and everything being circumstantial, which it was, and having the media basically convict him already before there was ever a trial or anything else, I find it weird that he wasn't more confident in his case and in his lawyers to where he felt like he had to run. His lawyer was Mark Garagos, apparently one of the best lawyers to the stars at the time. The prosecution had nothing. So what was going on behind closed doors that they didn't let anybody know about that Scott was scared enough to leave? What do you think about that, Amber?
He never confessed.
No.
Okay. So he doesn't have one of those false confession cases.
No.
So he's talking to Amber Frey, and she's clearly upset and feels betrayed. And he never says anything bad about Laci. Yeah, the police have always had suspicions about him. You know, they went through his house. They didn't find anything suspicious. How did she die? They never found the crime scene. Some people suspect him smothering her, but I never really found clear police interviews that say how they really knew how he killed her. They don't have a weapon that he used. So this is really bizarre to me. Now, granted, they have witnesses claiming they saw her walking the dog. These witnesses believe wholeheartedly it was the same day she disappeared, not the day before. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday.
Right.
Okay, now, witnesses and false memories are common. Of course, we have already discussed the woman saying, okay, you know, she put the dog back in the yard at 10:18. Granted, again, I can't tell you what I did at 10:18 yesterday. I couldn't tell you what I was doing at that time. I don't remember. So this is all circumstantial. Why did he want to run, sis? I don't know. Maybe because the police have been pressuring him, the journalists have been harassing him. Maybe he was afraid of people thinking that he was going to be guilty. However, if he was going to run, it makes him look more guilty. And that's just my opinion.
It's absolutely crazy. It just is. Oh, and let's not even talk about during the trial how many jury members left. I think it was 4 in all, and one of them was actually the foreman. And the foreman got dismissed, he claimed, because he was being threatened by another juror because he wanted to go over the evidence all over again because he was convinced there wasn't enough to convict Scott. So it was like every time a jury member said, I don't think he did it, they found a reason to dismiss him and bring in somebody who did think he did it, which is why juries are not selected for their biased opinion in the first place. But this is what's happening clearly in front of everybody, and nobody's saying anything. As a matter of fact, juror number 8, let's talk about him because he was actually heard in the bar by the bartender. Now, this is hearsay because when the bartender went to court for the hearing on the juryman, he pleaded the 5th. And so it was thrown out. But what apparently was said that is the bartender overheard juror number 8 and some of the other jurors drinking the night before they were to hand down the sentencing for Scott. And he was saying that we're going to fry that guy, you know, we're going to give him the death penalty, we're going to hang him. He was basically announcing this to the jury people, anybody else that could hear them. They were obviously all drinking. And when he came forward and told one of the lawyers that he heard these jury people, one of the lawyers said, well, I've got to tell the judge. So the judge gathers up all the jury members, you know, into this little hearing and wants to talk about what's all being said and wants to see if we're going to have a hung jury or something. And when they get the bartender on the stand, the bartender pleads the 5th. And they have to throw it out. So juror number 8, instead of getting excused or there being a hung jury, gets to go right back to the jury room. And that part of it is dismissed. Now, I'm calling BS, because why? How in the world would the bartender even know who that was or what they were talking about unless it was really going on? The jury members and all that were not all known to the public at that time. So how would this bartender know unless it was really going on? And the fact that he was able to plead the fifth, he should have been held in contempt of court. He should have been held for something, obstruction of justice or something, because that is a serious accusation and something should have been done. So juror number A should have been took off the jury regardless, just because all this nonsense was going on. Remember when one of the jury members were dismissed because he was seen at the metal detector accidentally talking to Laci's brother, and they dismissed him? So something as small as that gets somebody dismissed, but being drunk in a bar talking about the verdict before it's even handed down is not grounds for dismissal? I mean, this is some BS going on with just the jury. What do you think's going on with that?
This is not okay, in my opinion, if this actually really happened. Because, sis, I don't know if you've ever been on jury duty before, but I had family members called to jury duty, and even if they fart wrong, they could get dismissed. This is how serious it is to be a jury member. Unfortunately, this was a high-profile case. High-profile cases make jury members miserable. No one wants to be a jury member. I don't know anyone I've ever met who was a jury member saying, yeah, I get to go do jury duty. Nobody wants to do jury duty. It disrupts your life. You're controlled. You can't talk to anybody about the case. Absolutely not, because if you're caught doing it, you will have serious consequences. So having this person be drunk, I don't even know why that person would even be there. And I don't understand why, if this really happened, something wasn't done. It's absolutely terrifyingly wrong.
Well, apparently, after that happened and the foreman got dismissed, it was 24 hours after they bring a new juror in. After the foreman gets dismissed, they bring a new juror in, and 24 hours later, they're ready with the verdict. Now, Scott's lawyer, Mark, has already went back to L.A. because he's thinking they're going to take a week to 2 weeks to try to figure out this whole verdict thing. It's going to take forever. And so he goes back to L.A. So in 24 hours later, the verdict comes in. Scott's lawyer's not even there. And Scott has to go before with the lawyer's assistant. So, okay. So on December 13, 2004, he was sentenced to death. They finally said, look, we believe him to be guilty, and now it's sentencing, and now they said we're just going to sentence him to death. So here's my question. He cheated on his wife, but is that cause for the death penalty? Because if the death penalty was for anyone who had cheated on their wife, half the men in America, half the men in the world would be on death row, okay? Where is the evidence that says Scott should be on death row, besides that he cheated on his wife? There are 7 or more witnesses that were never interviewed by the prosecution or police. Okay, if you break down this case, piece by piece looking for evidence, there's absolutely none. So what was this man convicted on? There's no proof he did it. There's no proof that she was in the boat and that he threw her in the bay with these alleged 5 weights that he allegedly made in his warehouse. There's people that saw Laci after Scott left that day, was seen by people leaving, can prove he was on his phone, hitting and pinging on cell towers. He can prove he was at his warehouse. He can prove he was at Berkeley Marina. He was seen at Berkeley Marina by himself. Where is the evidence? Where is it that says, oh, my God, here's the crime scene, here's what happened, oh, my God, he did it? Scott Peterson is a jerk. He cheated on his 8-month pregnant wife, and I am not okay with that. But that does not make him a murderer. And one thing I wanted to bring up in this conclusion video, which I ended up not talking about because I couldn't find all the facts and pieces on it that I want, is 6 months before Laci went missing, another pregnant woman that was about 8 or 9 months along went missing, and her torso washed up in the exact same bay. Now, I know if y'all Google that, you will find it. It's absolutely true, and it absolutely happened. Is it just a coincidence that Laci ended up the same way? So what is Scott, a copycat killer? I mean, this is just ridiculous. So I don't know. So let's go to the final conclusion of our opinion of Scott Peterson's guilt or innocence, Amber. Who wants to go first? You want to go first? You want me to tell you what I think first?
You tell me what you think first.
I think he's innocent. I think he's the biggest jerk that ever walked this entire earth. I think he's the biggest cheater, and somebody needs to kick his you-know-what for doing it. But I do not think he murdered his wife. And I do know that he told Amber that on December 9th his wife was missing, or he lost his wife and this would be the first Christmas without him. And I know a lot of men that lie and say some crap like that. It doesn't always happen to coincidentally become true. That's just crazy. That to me was insane, and I don't think he ever in a million years would have thought something like that would have happened. But I do think he had probably either planned on divorcing her after she had the baby, or he was just basically cheating with Amber, thinking he wouldn't get caught. Like he said all along, he was just weak, and he was arrogant, and he just thought he wouldn't get caught. And he hadn't ever planned on being with Amber, but he was cheating with Amber because Laci was pregnant, and after the baby was born, he didn't plan on being with Amber anymore. So I don't know who to believe on that, but I do know that for me to say that the man is guilty, I need to see some evidence, and I just don't see it. What do you think, Amber?
Well, I think he's an arrogant, selfish man. Do I think he's a jerk? Yes. However, I could not find any evidence of a crime scene. I don't know what weapon was used to kill her. It's hard for me to say that he murdered her because there's no crime scene that links him to her murder. His actions are very suspicious, but I don't think just because he's a cheater, he's a murderer. I need more proof in order to surely say that he's guilty.
I agree. And what we're basing our opinions on are the facts of the case and what isn't there. And what isn't there is evidence. Do I know 100% that Scott didn't do it? Well, no. But is there proof that he did? No. And that's what the jury should have been looking at. They should have been looking at, is there enough evidence? They took a whole bunch of little circumstantial evidence and they built a ladder with it. And by the time the jury got to the top of that ladder, they felt he was guilty. But you have to look at the rungs of that ladder. He's a cheater. He got caught with this stuff in the car. He dyed his hair blonde. I mean, this is not enough proof to bring reasonable. I mean, there's reasonable doubt here, people. Come on now. There's no evidence. You know, the man could have murdered her, but what we get in America is a fair trial. And this man was convicted of being guilty before he even hit his first trial date. And that's the problem, because if it can happen to somebody else, it can happen to you. It can happen to anybody. Again, we are basing our conclusions, our opinions on the facts of the case. And the facts of the case don't show any evidence. It's a lot of circumstantial BS is what it is. But it's not enough to convict somebody of murder. He was convicted solely on the fact that he was a cheater and the media went wild. And that's what it was based on. And that's my opinion, you know? Is he where he's supposed to be? I don't know. But the problem is you don't know either, and there's not enough evidence to put him there. And that's the problem.
I think maybe his trial would have gone a little bit differently if he was tried in a different state where they could find jury members that didn't know much about him.
I think that they should have got a change of venue over to Arizona or Nevada or somewhere like that. I think that he was convicted. The media had him convicted. Even before he was actually arrested, they said he did it. Let's get him. What's the problem? The police needed to arrest this man because the public was going crazy, because the media portrayed him as a killer walking around free, and they wanted his hide, and that's why he got convicted. He did not get a fair trial. Like he said himself, when the verdict was read, he almost passed out. He just sat there, just stunned, because one, if you're innocent, you think justice works. You're never going to be convicted of a crime that you didn't commit, because the police would know better. Just like we talked about in Darlie Routier, you would think the police would know better and that it would take a crap load of evidence and proof that you did something. But we look at cases like this and we understand that that's not the case. They'll convict you solely because they think that you did it. And they'll build circumstantial BS cases, and they will lock you up. If it can happen to these people, it can happen to you. We need a better justice system. We need evidence. Evidence needs to speak. And if there is no evidence, sometimes we have to wait until there is. If that means the case goes cold for 20 years, it just goes cold for 20 years. You should not be locking up innocent people. Now, there's a lot of people that are going to show hate for this video because we don't believe he's guilty. But we don't believe he's guilty because there's no evidence. If you want us to believe he's guilty, show us something other than circumstantial. We need to see proof, and that should be for everybody. I think that Scott deserves a new trial. What do you think?
I believe he does. Unfortunately, I don't think he's a nice man. However, just because he's an arrogant, selfish person, I do believe he deserves a fair trial.
Thank you for watching and sharing, and do not forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you will be notified immediately when the next one is uploaded. And as always, if you have a case you think we would be interested in covering, you can submit it to us via the link in the description box. Bye.
Your voice used to keep me warm in the cold of the night.